Hello, and welcome to the From Nature to Nurture podcast. I am your host, Danielle, and we are here today with episode 32. If you are listening to this close to when it comes out, you know that it is August, and I am in Tennessee. It is extremely hot and humid. I feel like majority of this summer we have been in a heat advisory, and it's been super wet, super humid, where even like the indoor spaces are becoming humid because the walls and doors just can't keep it out. My garden is very wild right now. I have not kept up with any of the weeding. Um, there's pollinators everywhere. There's pops of color everywhere from the goldenrod and the passionflower and the ironweed. And it is just full of life, so much abundant life. August is a strange threshold month for many herbalists because we're still very much in summer, right? It's still hot, humid, vibrant, but we're starting to see those signs of the wheel turning, right? We're starting to have to work on our final harvests and plan ahead for the fall and the winter and kind of assess what's already in our apothecaries and what remedies we need to start stocking up on. We start planning what roots we're going to harvest and think about what worked and didn't work in our gardens. So I thought for today, instead of doing a traditional plant profile this week, I'd walk you through my own herbal practice and my garden and talk about what an herbalist is doing in August, or at least what I'm doing in August. And this year, the answer to what I'm doing is actually a lot less than I expected. So, like I said, this year has been extremely hot and wet. I do not harvest right after the rain or even within a day or two of a really heavy rain because all of the um, plant constituents are watered down because all of the plants are kind of plumped up with all this excess water. And I also don't want to risk harming the plant by harvesting it while it's wet and then having that water breed bacteria and making the plant sick. But if I'm not harvesting when it's wet and it's been a very, very wet summer, I'm also just not harvesting a lot in general because on those brutally hot, dry days, I can't handle it. I have a naturally hot constitution and I get very lightheaded if I'm in extreme heat for, I'd say, even a moderate period of time. And so it's just not worth putting myself at risk. So I missed a lot of harvest windows. I sat so many days in my house thinking that I should be harvesting down in the garden. My yarrow needs to be trimmed down. I need to go pull those weeds. And I'm missing all of these prime abundant times where the flowers are in bloom and ready to be shared with the world. All of these different plants that I had planned on drying and making preparations with, but it ultimately kind of felt initially like a failure because I didn't make it out there in time, and so it almost felt like it was a waste. But I'm trying to reframe that because as an herbalist, as a reciprocal herbalist, I'm not focused just on harvesting, taking what I need. I'm also thinking about the pollinators. And what I've noticed is my garden has been so alive. Every year it's so alive, but I think with me taking less, I'm also just seeing new different types of butterflies and moths, huge fat bumblebees, which are I can't even put them into words how much I love them. And I'm seeing that it's not wasted because all of these beautiful beings are being able to help other beautiful beings, right? If a caterpillar ate it, was it wasted? No. If a bee drank from it, was it wasted? No. If it produced seeds and was able to repopulate, was it wasted? No. And so I'm trying to reframe that failure into I'm leaving things for my ecosystem. I didn't harvest as much as I wanted, and that's okay because I'm not the primary recipient of the harvest this year. But what I have actually been harvesting and and going about and getting are a few different plants. So this time of year, especially here in Tennessee, passionflower and goldenrod are in full swing. They're very easy to spot. You can normally see them along the sides of the roads everywhere, and these are the two beings that I've been working with a lot this season. So with passionflower right now, you will see a combination of fruits and flowers, which is amazing. I personally harvest fruits, flowers, and leaves. A lot of times you do work with the leaves and the flowers together. Um, but I'm also trying to be cognizant of who else needs it, who else is out there, right? So one thing that I like to do when I go to harvest is I don't just harvest, right? I stop and I check and I look to make sure are there like any butterfly eggs or any cocoons or like anything currently needing that plant. Now, I will say specifically with passionflower, they do have this really sticky nectar that a lot of ants enjoy. And I don't worry too much about the ants. If there's a ton of ants on it, I'll probably leave it just because that does also make it a bit more of a hassle for me. They will like walk off after I harvest it, but if I'm seeing that it's being like very abundantly enjoyed, then I'm going to leave it. But then I'm also harvesting the fruits, not specifically to eat. So you can obviously eat them. One fun tip, specifically for like the Tennessee variety of passion flower, is a lot of people assume that the fruits never ripen because they don't turn yellow orangey, kind of like how we see passion fruit on like the juice bottles and whatnot. Ours does not change color. Ours stays green. Now, how you can tell if it's ripe is if it starts looking wrinkly. It almost looks like it's drying up, and that's how you know that it is ripe. It's still gonna be that green color, but just a little wrinkly. Now, I said I don't really use it for the fruit. You can, absolutely. I am trying to spread the seeds. I'm trying to bring the seeds to my property. I keep transplanting passion flower roots and whatnot, trying to find like the best way. But what I have seen and what I've heard from many people is that passion flower does not like to be planted with intention. It wants you to mimic that wildness, right? So one of the best ways is to eat the fruit and then just spit out the seeds where you want them. You're just mimicking nature, mimicking other animals eating the fruit and then kind of like leaving the seeds in their droppings. So that is a way that I'm going to be working with it this year to be able to try to get some more passion flower on my property. I do tend to dry a lot of the passion flower and passion flower leaf, but this year I'm also made a fresh tincture out of it because I am trying to work on turning off my brain, and passion flower has this wonderful affinity of being able to quiet the mind, slow the thoughts, especially if you're someone like me where as soon as your head hits the pillow, your brain kind of goes into overdrive, like replaying everything from the day and going through all of your checklists and thinking how you could have done things differently and trying to remember what you're supposed to do tomorrow. And sometimes it doesn't matter how many lists you have like physically written down to try to get all this stuff out. Sometimes our brains just have a really hard time letting go and getting out of those loops. And passion flower has this wonderful affinity for that specifically. Um, and it's one that I lean on again and again, whether it's in a tea or like I said, I'm doing a tincture this year. That way I can work with it throughout the year. I don't have to worry about running out because that tincture is going to last a lot longer than a dried leaf or flower would. Now, when it comes to determining when you should be harvesting, that is a bit more nuanced. There isn't a set time. What I look for is these are areas that I go back to again and again. And I don't harvest at the very first opening of a flower, really of any flower, but specifically of the passion flowers because they are a host plant for a few different butterflies. So I want to leave them there for a while. So my general rule of thumb is to at least give it like a week or two if I can. Sometimes the passion blooms can turn really fast depending on the weather. So sometimes it's just like an opportunity of, hey, I know this area is very abundant, so I'm going to try to harvest this flower, or I will go back a few times to double check and make sure that the population is still looking good and healthy and nothing else is really needing it more than I do right now. And I will still also, work with the vine as well. So I will just harvest like a big long strip of it, and then I will just take scissors and chop it up, and then dry it or tincture it or whatever I'm going to do with it from there. But these alien-looking flowers are so special. If you haven't seen a passion flower in real life, I really, truly hope that you're able to because it is a wild experience. Especially here in Tennessee, the passion flower looks like an alien tropical kind of flower, and we are not in a tropical area. And it is just so, so stunning. And there's so many different varieties. So I highly recommend that you see if there are some passion flowers in your area or even within like a fine driving distance because they truly are magical. And then this time of year, we have our beautiful, vibrant goldenrod. We have a few different varieties of goldenrod here, but what's crazy is there's about 150 different varieties of goldenrod in the US alone. So it's not super important that you know exactly what type of goldenrod because you can work with them all the same. The chemical makeups are all about the same. But just to know that it is goldenrod for sure, that part is important. I can't think of any lookalikes off the top of my head because they do have a very distinctive look. At least in our area, there's nothing that is going to look like it. But there's those bright yellow flowers and they look very like fuzzy and soft and the plants are so tall that they normally sway in the breeze. They're beautiful. If you're seeing these fields of yellow, fluffy looking flowers, it's probably goldenrod. Now, goldenrod has a lot of benefits. For me, I specifically work with goldenrod for its drying action and for its benefits to the respiratory system. So I like to harvest goldenrod to keep on hand for allergies, or if I need like a really strong drying plant for my respiratory system, if I'm getting really phlegmy from like a cold or a flu, or just from, the extreme weather changes that will be coming up here in the next month, month and a half. And this is a plant that you can work with in tea or tincture or glycerin. I prefer just doing tinctures. I think it's easy that way and it's nice to kind of just keep on hand. And like I said with the passion flower, when you tincture something, you can also have it for a longer season, right? So I can have it on hand until, until whenever I finish it, but like it'll also help me through next allergy season as well. Something that I did want to mention is that a lot of people blame fall seasonal allergies on goldenrod because it's a bright, showy plant. It's the first thing that you're going to notice. But more often than not, it's actually the ragweed that is causing allergies and not goldenrod. Goldenrod, the pollen isn't normally traveling as far, and ragweed and goldenrod grow in the same areas, in the same spaces. So they're normally side by side. And if you're sneezing, it's probably because of the ragweed, not our beautiful goldenrod. But our goldenrod does have a strong affinity to help with allergies as well, especially for like drying up all of the drippiness, but also helps to work with our immune response for our allergies. So those are the two plants that I am currently wildcrafting or foraging. I do get a little bit of goldenrod on my property, but not enough to really support anything. I think I have like 2 plants, and some years they flower and some years they don't because they're not growing in the best area. They're actually growing up right in the center of a rose bush. So depending on how full that rose bush is, sometimes it blocks a lot of the sun, and if you've seen goldenrod, it's normally in bright, sunny areas. So those are the 2 that I normally have to go off of my property for. However, I also have a huge garden. I have 4 8-foot by 2-foot beds, as well as multiple pots on front porch and back porch, and then plants that are growing wild on my property as well. Just this morning, I went and harvested a bunch of horseweed and shiso, and I've been harvesting a lot of violet leaf and plantain leaf, and then I also did a bit of a garden cleanup, a little bit, not not too much. Um, so I harvested some mountain mint and catmint and catnip and echinacea, some rose, some chocolate mint, a lot of mints this year. Um, but like I said, a lot of things I didn't get to in time. So like I actually didn't harvest any yarrow this year, even though I have a very abundant yarrow. It just kind of died back with all of the extreme heat and wet back and forth. But I'm not doing a garden cleanup yet, and I actually don't do a big garden cleanup until the springtime. I like to leave a lot of my garden to kind of just die back on its own to be able to help the pollinators, right? Because the birds and everything kind of like rely on the seeds that are coming from my plants, and the bugs will use the stems to make little homes, and they'll burrow in like the dead leaf fall and everything. So I don't do a big garden cleanup. I will still do a big last harvest. I normally wait until September for that, so right now I'm kind of just getting what is overly abundant and kind of starting to see like how my early fall is going to look. And I don't harvest everything that's left either. I like to leave a bunch to go to seed. That way I'm not having to actively replant things each year. So, like a lot of my yarrow will just reseed and kind of spread all over the garden. I have echinacea popping up like 5 feet from where I planted it. I have everything is starting to grow out into the aisles, especially the mints, because in my head, I thought mountain mint is a native, so it's not going to take over, but that was incorrect. So I have mountain mint and cat mint growing into the aisles. My St. John's wort was kind of pushed out this year by the mint, so I'm going to have to reestablish that this next year. But then I'm also having things like nettle starting popping out of in the aisles, and valerian, and things that I haven't seen other people talk about them, like, reseeding, so it's been really interesting to kind of watch the garden unfold. This is also the longest that I have had a garden as well, so I'm at 6 years in this house. No, 5 years, and these plants, like, some of them have been here from the very beginning, right? And so it is extra special to be able to harvest from these same beings every year and sitting with them and caring for them and seeing them grow, like, as I grow alongside them. But this year, that is hitting a little different. While all of my harvesting for this year has been focused on plants and leaves and above ground parts, I am now starting to plan into the autumn where I will be harvesting roots. And we harvest them in the fall or even the early spring, depending on the plants, because we follow where the energy of the plant is, right? So in the spring and summer, everything is growing above ground. All of the nutrients that the plants are soaking in through their roots are being pushed up and out into their leaves and flowers and fruits. And that is where the energy of that plant is going, that vitality. But into the early spring or fall, we have the energy is going down towards the roots. The roots are expanding, they're getting going deeper, wider, and that is where all of the vital life force of that plant is going to be. And you typically harvest roots once the above ground part is starting to die back. So I'm starting to see that right now in some of my plants. This year, I will be harvesting marshmallow, valerian, and elecampane. And it's pretty ironic that this is the year that I am harvesting these roots when I didn't get a lot to harvest through like the herbaceous part of my garden. Roots you have to wait so long for. You're not normally harvesting in the first year. A lot of times you're waiting 3+ years, and I've been waiting for this moment. I have been caring for these beings at least 3 to 5 years, and it's I don't even really know how to put it into words because it's something that I've been preparing for so long, and I'm honestly having a harder time with it than I expected. These plants I have sat with and sang to and tended to for so many years. I've built relationships with them. I've sat with them when I've needed community. I've cried with them. I've bled on them. Like all of these pretty profound experiences, but it's hitting different because I've never harvested them in this way. I harvest leaves and flowers majority of the time, and that feels natural. You know, you take a little bit of Tulsi and you leave the rest. You gather some roses and more flowers come back. Working with the aerial portions of the plants, there's a lot that you can do to kind of help feed the ecosystem while also tending to like you and your community. But roots are different. When I go to dig these up, they're not going to come back in the spring, and I'm not going to watch my plant friends reemerge again. I know I talk about plant relationships a lot, but I want to give examples of what it kind of looks like over years, right? So I planted all of these not as seeds, so at least I have that, but as seedlings, so already just like little baby plants. And I've seen them grow like crazy. I've learned what they look like throughout all the seasons. I've learned what they look like when they're thirsty. I've seen them flop over or break in storms. I have weeded around them. I have seen what insects arrive to them again and again. I've watched them disappear every winter, and I knew that they were going to come back, and I would always be so excited when I would see them reemerge in the spring. And I've had moments where I thought that maybe they weren't gonna come back because, like, maybe they didn't look like they were doing well, but they do. I've moved things around in the garden because that's just where the valerian lives now because it's starting to have a babies out in the aisles, so now we don't mow that area. And after 5 years, it feels so different. So what does it mean to love a plant and also intend to work with it? That's something that I have been sitting with because herbalism can sometimes make harvesting sound really romantic, right? Like you talk about gratitude and reciprocity and asking permission, ethical harvesting, making offerings. And those are all beautiful ideas, but at the end of the day, I'm still standing there with a shovel thinking about how this plant is going to die because I want its medicine. And I can thank the plant and I can harvest carefully and I can try to save as much as I can, but that's different when it's the roots. And I don't want to make it feel comfortable, right? Like, yes, I'm crying over harvesting plants. Um, but that's not the goal. I don't want to feel comfortable killing a plant. I don't want to make that discomfort have a function in my life. If if harvesting a root felt consequential, then you'd probably ask yourself, do you actually need this harvest? How much do you need? Do I need all of this? What am I going to make with it? And how is it going to help me and my community? All of these are great questions, and I am kind of just having to figure out not necessarily how to make myself feel better, but how to make it feel more worthwhile, because feeling the weight of that is what keeps me from casually ripping out plants and harvesting plants willy-nilly without going about it in a more thoughtful direction. Something that I have been telling myself as I prepare to harvest from these is that plants aren't immortal just because I'm not harvesting from them. My garden has changed. Perennials eventually die. Animals will eat the plants. Disease will take them. It's been extreme weather, so the weather could kill them. And plants tend to reproduce, die back, decompose, and become something new. The death that I am seeing in this root harvest is not the death of the garden, but I'm choosing to remember that everything has a purpose and a cycle, and how I go about it is what matters. The intention will change a lot of it. So, what I plan to do is while I'm harvesting these full beings, I plan to add in a bunch of extra nutrients and love into that soil, and then starting again next year with baby versions again. So going through this cycle, and there's a couple that I don't think I will harvest because, like I said, they've started growing out into the aisles, and the aisle ones aren't nearly as old as the bed ones. So seeing them make babies and reproduce also helps because then I'm caring for the babies. But it is funny because I've spent half of this growing season feeling guilty because I didn't harvest enough. And now that I'm approaching root season, I'm feeling guilty because I'm going to be harvesting more than I usually do in this one capacity. And both of those push and pull feelings are making me kind of reconsider the same thing of why am I measuring my relationship with my garden by how much that I take from it? I do so much to make sure that it's native plants and pollinator friendly plants so that I am giving back as much as I am taking, if not more. And so that is kind of where I'm at this growing season. I have been having to make a lot of individual decisions about my garden and restructuring and following the seasonal shifts and listening to how nature wants to work with me instead of me working against nature. And this year it means that it's now time for me to harvest these roots and to leave a lot of the above ground parts alone. So as we move back inside after our harvests and after caring for our gardens and our areas, there's a lot of tasks. There's a lot of tasks to kind of wrap up the growing season. I am cleaning out my drying rack. I am making sure that everything is perfectly dried ahead of time before I start storing them so I don't get mold. I am double and triple checking labels because I've noticed that I've slacked on keeping up with efficient labeling. I am checking on like the older inventory of the things that I harvested last year. I'm going through my tinctures and making sure they all still smell and taste right. I have been cleaning a plethora of jars and making room for the new projects I'll be working on this winter. And I've been checking on like just a general assessment of what I actually have before I go harvest more from the garden. Because year after year, I just end up standing in the kitchen staring at my multiple giant baskets of plants and wondering why on earth I harvested this much because now I have to process it all and figure out what to do with it. I don't need to make everything. Like herbalism on social media can make it look like you need to have 6 different varieties of the same plant, like an oil and a tincture and a vinegar and a salve and a wound wash and like whatever, like all this kind of crazy stuff. But a successful harvest to me is not measured by how many preparations I make. It's how I've thoughtfully planned out my harvest and my process, right? So as we're kind of going in towards more of the fall season, I'm looking at harvesting those roots, gathering seeds, putting the garden to bed, reviewing everything that I have in my apothecary and deciding what needs to be replenished or what needs to be gifted to people, and thinking about next year. Maybe thinking about what plants I want to add or what plants I'm kind of done with. Um, Looking at what thrived, what needs to change, like how I need to find a new spot for St. John's wort that's not by a mint. And to kind of just sit in this weird liminal time between abundance and waning energy and really appreciate that I have a garden at all, that I have the knowledge and the ability to be able to make all these remedies for my friends and family and community, and that I've been able to develop these relationships with these plants. So I wanted to invite you to go outside. It doesn't have to be in a grand garden or in a complete wild space, but just go outside and notice those bits of life around you. That could be the plantain growing in the sidewalk, or that could be a lush rose bush next to your front door, or the dragonfly that's zipping past your window. Just notice the abundance of life that's still around and the subtle changes in the season. I know that August can feel really brutal and September can start feeling very strange as a liminal month in between seasons. So, this is the time for you to start kind of your own rooting down to be able to notice those subtle shifts so that when it starts to become cold, when it starts to become darker, and the flowers start dying back, it doesn't feel as severe. So that's an herbalist's August, or at least mine. At the beginning of August, I could look at my shelves and see everything that I didn't harvest this year, or I could walk outside and see where it went instead, into the bees, into the butterflies, into the seeds, into roots, and into next year's plants, back into the soil. And maybe one of the things that's been from this strange growing season that has taught me is that abundance doesn't always have to end up in a jar for it to count as abundance. Some of this year's medicine stayed in the garden and went to other beings in the community, and some of it I will finally be harvesting after years of it quietly growing underground. If you would like to find out more about my upcoming classes and offerings, you can find me at rootandwandercollective.com. I'll see you along the plant path.